Why did the laughter stop the moment her mop froze against the concrete? The hangar had been alive with noise just seconds earlier, boots scraping, jokes ricocheting off steel beams, the careless confidence of people who believed they were untouchable. Then she straightened, slow and deliberate like someone waking from a long memory. Diana didn't rush. She never rushed. Rushing belonged to people who needed to prove something. Captain Stone's voice hung in the air, smug and loud. "Hey, you, think you can start the A-10?" Phones were already out, grins sharpened. Humiliation was the point, it always was. Diana met his eyes for the first time since that morning. Not angry, not afraid, just calm. The kind of calm that unsettled people without them knowing why. "Yes, sir," she said. Something shifted, not in the room, inside her. She hadn't planned for this. She planned to observe, to document, to endure 3 months of invisibility, of being spoken over, around, through. 3 months of swallowing the ache that came with hearing your life reduced to a uniform that no one looked at twice. But the aircraft behind them wasn't just metal to her. It was memory. It was muscle memory. It was a language her hands still spoke fluently, even after silence. She set the mop aside. Someone laughed, someone filmed. Diana walked. Each step toward the A-10 felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because she knew what would follow. Truth had weight, and once released, it didn't ask permission. She ran her eyes along the aircraft's body, not admiring it, not nostalgic, assessing, instinctively, the way she always had, and there it was, a red safety pin still seated where it never should have been. Her chest tightened, not with triumph but disappointment. They weren't just arrogant, they were careless. "Safety pin left in the main landing gear," she said quietly. "Silence." The maintenance sergeant stiffened, took the pin from her hand like it was radioactive. And just like that, the joke cracked. She kept going. Hydraulics, intakes, panels. Her movements were precise, economical, deeply familiar, not flashy, never flashy. Real skill never is. Captain Stone's grin faltered. Diana felt the eyes on her now, not amused, not mocking, watching, wondering. She didn't look back. She climbed into the cockpit, the smell of worn leather and warm metal wrapping around her like a remembered embrace. For a brief second, she closed her eyes. She hadn't sat here in years. And yet, her hands didn't hesitate. The APU whined to life. Someone cursed under their breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. But Diana wasn't performing. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply doing what she had trained herself to do when lives depended on it, because once they had. And somewhere behind her, a colonel heard the engines begin to thunder. Why did that sound feel like judgment? Why did the engines sound different when she started them? Not louder, not faster, just sure. The hangar vibrated as the first engine came alive, smooth and disciplined, no stutter, no protest. The second followed exactly on time, 30 seconds, no more, no less. Textbook. The maintenance sergeant stared like he'd seen a ghost. The pilots didn't speak. Phones lowered, mouths hung open. Diana listened, not just to the engines but to the silence between reactions. Panic tried to creep in then, a thin thread of anxiety winding its way up her spine. Not fear of being caught. Fear of being seen. She had learned long ago that invisibility could be armor, that once people saw you clearly, they demanded pieces of you back, explanations, justifications, confessions. She didn't owe them any. She ran the checks, control surfaces, pressure, temps, everything where it should be. The aircraft responded like an old friend who hadn't forgotten her either. "She's taxiing," someone whispered. Yes, she was. Carefully, respectfully, like you moved something you loved. Security vehicles approached. Blue lights bled across the hangar walls. And then the colonel arrived. Colonel Brennan didn't shout. She never needed to. She watched Diana shut the aircraft down, watched her climb down in worn sneakers and a cleaning uniform that suddenly looked like a disguise instead of a truth. "Major Harper," Brennan said quietly. Diana snapped to attention before she could stop herself. That reflex said everything. The name rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Someone gasped. Someone else swore. Ghost 7. Presumed dead, memorialized, taught about. Standing there with a mop bucket. The laughter from earlier returned in memory, but now it burned. Stone looked like he might be sick. The colonel spoke calmly, efficiently. "Inspector General, undercover, 3 months of observation, culture, safety, leadership." Diana listened, detached. She'd already written this part in her head 100 times. What she hadn't prepared for was the weight of eyes on her now, not mocking, but searching, as if everyone was trying to reconcile who she had been with who they'd decided she was allowed to be. She felt tired then, bone deep. Not from flying, from carrying silence. When Stone tried to explain himself, she didn't interrupt. She let him speak, let him reveal himself, because real accountability came from letting people finish their own sentences. When he was done, she met his eyes. "Impact matters more than intent," she said. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge. It was fact. The colonel took over. Careers paused. Investigations launched. The hangar emptied slowly, like a storm had passed through and left everyone unsure where to step next. As Diana walked away, someone whispered, "I didn't know." She didn't turn back. That was the problem. Why did she choose silence when she could have demanded respect? Later, alone in a conference room, Diana removed the recording device from her pocket and set it on the table. It felt heavier now than it had that morning. Sergeant Foster sat across from her, hands folded, eyes steady but tired. "How bad is it?" he asked. Diana didn't soften the truth. She never had in the air. Systemic. She explained what she documented: shortcuts, intimidation, retaliation, fear masquerading as cohesion. Foster nodded slowly. "We were afraid." "I know," Diana said. That was the part people misunderstood. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was survival. Colonel Brennan joined them, files under her arm, expression grim but focused. She listened, asked questions, made decisions. When she asked Diana why she'd taken the assignment, Diana didn't answer right away. Because she remembered the first time she'd been ignored in a briefing room. The first time her warnings had been brushed aside because they were inconvenient. Because ego had been louder than judgment. "Because I didn't want someone else to pay the price for silence," she finally said. The colonel nodded. The investigation grew, expanded, spread. By dawn, it wasn't about one captain anymore. It was about who the military protected and who it overlooked. Why did accountability feel heavier than combat? Captain Stone returned once more, desperate, confused, still clinging to the idea that respect was something you earned only by rank. Diana listened. And then she spoke. "Respect isn't hierarchical," she said quietly. "It's foundational." Stone didn't understand. Not really. And that realization hurt more than his mockery ever had. After he left, the room felt hollow. "You could have crushed him," Foster said. Diana shook her head. "He did that himself." The general arrived that morning. The briefing lasted hours. Evidence spoke louder than emotion. When it ended, Diana was promoted, offered a role she hadn't known she still wanted. She thought of the cockpit, the silence before action, the responsibility. She accepted. Not for power. For prevention. Why did it feel like coming home? As sunlight spilled across the flight line, Diana stood alone for a moment. The A-10 sat quietly now, safe, grounded, waiting. She thought about dignity, how it didn't announce itself, how it didn't shout. It endured. And when the moment came, it acted. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that wait, and sometimes the engines speak for you. Why did her hands hesitate for just half a second before touching the throttle? No one noticed it. Not the pilots frozen in place, not the maintenance crews edging closer, not even the phones still pointed at her like weapons unsure whether to fire. But Diana felt it, that microscopic pause where memory collided with responsibility. She hadn't been in a cockpit like this since the night she was supposed to die. The canopy glass reflected her face faintly, older now, lines earned, not lost. The cleaning uniform felt foreign against the seat harness like a borrowed skin. For a brief moment, anxiety crept in. Not fear of failure, fear of success. Because once the engine spoke, silence would no longer protect her. She inhaled slowly. Checklist. Always the checklist. APU stable, electrical steady, hydraulics green. Her voice, calm and even, carried through the intercom like it had thousands of times before. The hangar swallowed the sound, but the aircraft listened. It always had. Behind her, Captain Stone's confidence was unraveling. He stood stiff, jaw clenched, trying to laugh and failing. He told himself it was luck, muscle memory from some long-forgotten training video. Anything but the truth forming right in front of him. The first engine spooled. That sound did something strange to Diana's chest. It wasn't nostalgia, it was grief. The kind you don't cry over because you've already mourned it once before. Friends, call signs, voices that never came back over the radio. She focused harder. 30 seconds. The second engine followed. Perfectly. The hangar trembled, not violently, but with purpose. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few people took unconscious steps backward, like instinct recognized authority before the mind did. She watched the gauges like they were heartbeats. Too fast and you lose control. Too slow and you lose momentum. Balance was everything. It always had been. Shut it down, someone yelled. She didn't. Not because she was defiant, because panic didn't belong in a cockpit, and she wasn't done yet. She released the brakes gently. The aircraft rolled forward, obedient, immense, alive. Taxiing wasn't dramatic. It never was. It was patience, precision, respect for mass and consequence. She kept her speed low, eyes scanning, anticipating every inch of movement before it happened. The pilots watched in stunned silence. That was when the weight hit her. Not pride. Exposure. She could feel eyes recalibrating, rewriting her in real time. The janitor wasn't a joke anymore. She was a question, and unanswered questions made people uncomfortable. Security vehicles came into view, lights flashing, urgency bleeding into the edges of the moment. Diana felt a familiar tightening in her gut. Not fear, responsibility. The same feeling she'd had every time she rolled into contested airspace, knowing people on the ground were counting on her to be exact. She completed the taxi circuit, brought the aircraft back, shut it down with the same care she'd started it. Engines wound down. Silence rushed in. She removed the headset slowly, climbed down the ladder like it was just another day. When her boots hit the concrete, she knew there was no going back. Colonel Brennan arrived with the kind of presence that didn't need volume. Her eyes moved quickly, took in everything, the aircraft, the crowd, Diana. Recognition flickered. Diana came to attention without thinking. That reflex told the whole story. Major Harper, Brennan said quietly. A few people gasped. Someone whispered a call sign like it was a myth you weren't supposed to say out loud. Stone's face drained of color. Diana felt something unexpected then, not satisfaction, sadness. Because this wasn't about proving who she was. It was about revealing who they had been when they thought no one important was watching. As Brennan spoke, explaining the investigation, Diana scanned the faces around her. She saw confusion, guilt, fear, relief. One young lieutenant looked like he might cry, not because he was in trouble but because he finally understood something he hadn't had words for before. Stone tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to make it small. Diana listened. That was the hardest part. Listening to someone justify cruelty as humor, arrogance as confidence, disrespect as leadership. When he finished, the silence was heavier than the engines had been. Impact matters more than intent, Diana said. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. Stone looked at her like he was seeing gravity for the first time. Security stood down. Orders were given. People began to disperse, unsure where to put their eyes now that the illusion was gone. Diana walked away before anyone could clap, before anyone could thank her. She didn't want applause. Applause faded. Accountability didn't. Inside the operations building, the air felt different, sterile, quiet, honest. She removed the recording device from her pocket and set it on the table, a small thing, heavy with truth. Sergeant Foster sat across from her, posture rigid, respect clear but not performative. "How long?" he asked. 12 weeks, Diana said. 4 days, 6 hours. He shook his head slowly. "We thought you were invisible." "I was," she replied. "That was the point." She explained what she'd seen, the patterns, the pressure, the way safety became optional when ego got bored. Foster listened, jaw tight, hands clenched. "I should have said more," he admitted quietly. Diana met his eyes. "You survived, that matters too." Colonel Brennan joined them later, files already stacking up like a storm system. She didn't waste time. "This is bigger than one officer," she said. Diana nodded. "It always is." As the investigation expanded, fatigue settled into Diana's bones. Not physical, emotional. The kind that came from carrying other people's truths alongside your own. That night, alone in the conference room, she allowed herself one moment. Just one. She sat back, closed her eyes. She remembered Afghanistan, the radio crackle, the ground commander's voice tight with fear, the way her aircraft had answered before words were even finished. She remembered why she'd flown, and why she'd come back. Because sometimes the battlefield isn't overseas. Sometimes it's a hangar. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people show you exactly who they are, then refuse to look away. The sun began to rise outside the window. Diana opened her eyes. The work was just beginning. Why did the room feel heavier once the doors finally closed? The hangar had emptied, the noise drained away, but the weight remained. It followed Diana down the corridor, into the conference room, into the chair she took without ceremony. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to everything that had just unraveled. Colonel Brennan stood near the window, arms folded, staring out at the flight line. The A-10 sat motionless now, engines cooling, silhouettes sharp against the early afternoon sun, machines at rest, people not so much. Diana placed her recorder on the table. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. That click was the sound of doors closing behind careers, the sound of truth becoming permanent. Sergeant Foster sat across from her, hands clasped, knuckles pale. He looked like a man replaying every moment he'd stayed quiet, every time he'd told himself it wasn't his place. "How do you carry it?" he asked suddenly. Diana looked up. "Carry what?" "All of it," he said, knowing, watching, not stepping in. She didn't answer right away, because the honest answer wasn't comforting. "You don't carry it all at once," she said finally. "You carry it one decision at a time, and sometimes you drop it." Foster nodded slowly, absorbing that. Outside, a distant engine started, ground equipment, not an aircraft, but the sound made Diana's shoulders tense anyway. Some instincts never turned off. Colonel Brennan turned from the window. "We've already notified Wing Command," she said. "Inspector General teams are being activated." Diana expected relief. Instead, she felt something closer to grief. Because investigations didn't just expose wrongdoing, they exposed people, and not everyone survived that with their sense of self intact. Brennan studied her. "You all right?" "Yes," Diana said automatically. Then she paused. "No," she corrected, "but I will be." The colonel nodded. She understood that answer better than most. They worked through the afternoon, then the evening. Files, timelines, names, patterns that once laid out were impossible to ignore. Safety reports quietly buried, complaints redirected, promotions earned not through competence but compliance. Diana felt a familiar anger stirring, not explosive, not reckless, cold, focused, the kind that sharpened the mind instead of clouding it. This wasn't about one arrogant captain. This was about permission. Permission to cut corners, permission to belittle, permission to stay silent. At one point, Brennan slid a personnel file across the table. "Captain Grant," she said, "Flight Commander." Diana already knew what she'd find. Audio recordings played. Grant's voice, measured, calm, careful, minimizing concerns, discouraging reports, choosing comfort over confrontation. Each clip felt like a small betrayal stacked on top of the last. "He knew," Foster said quietly. "Yes," Diana replied, "and he chose not to know." That distinction mattered. When Grant was called in, his confidence was gone. He sat stiffly, eyes darting between Brennan and Diana as if hoping one of them would soften. Neither did. "Why didn't you act?" Brennan asked. Grant's answer came quickly, too quickly: "Unit cohesion." Diana felt a familiar disappointment. That phrase had justified more damage than any weapon she'd ever flown. "Cohesion without accountability is just quiet decay," Diana said. Grant had no response. When Brennan relieved him of command, the room didn't erupt. No shouting, no drama, just the sound of a chair scraping back and footsteps fading down the hall. Afterward, Foster exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. "I thought it would feel better," he admitted. Diana nodded. "It rarely does at first." Night fell without anyone noticing. Coffee replaced meals. Fatigue settled in, but no one suggested stopping. Momentum mattered now. Pausing felt dangerous, like giving denial time to regroup. At some point, Brennan leaned back in her chair. "Why didn't you reveal yourself sooner?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious, almost personal. Diana considered it carefully. "Because people behave differently when they think power is watching," she said. "I needed to see who they were when they thought it was." Foster swallowed. "And what did you see?" Diana didn't answer immediately. Images flickered through her mind. Laughter in the hangar, phones raised, the ease with which dignity had been stripped away. "I saw how easy it is to forget why standards exist," she said, "and how hard it is to remind people once they've decided those standards don't apply to them." Near midnight, a secure phone rang. Brennan answered, her posture shifted, straightened. "Yes, sir, understood." She hung up and looked at Diana. "General Anderson is coming in person, tomorrow morning." Diana felt the weight of that settle in. This was no longer a contained correction. This was escalation. "Good," Diana said. Brennan studied her for a moment. "You're calm." Diana gave a small, tired smile. "I've been shot at. Bureaucracy doesn't scare me." Later, alone for a few minutes, Diana stepped outside. The air was cool, the base quieter now. She stood near the flight line, looking at the aircraft silhouettes under floodlights. She thought about the first time she'd felt truly invisible, a briefing years ago. Her warnings dismissed because they complicated the plan. That mission had gone wrong. People had paid for it. She promised herself then that if she ever had the chance to stop that pattern, she would. Even if it meant scrubbing floors. Even if it meant swallowing pride. Her phone vibrated with a secure message. promotion consideration, expanded authority, oversight role. She didn't respond yet. Power wasn't the goal. Prevention was. Inside, Foster was briefing maintenance crews. For the first time in months, no one rushed him. No one rolled their eyes. People listened. Change didn't arrive with speeches. It arrived with permission. When Diana returned to the conference room, Brennan looked up. "They're standing down flight operations," she said. "Full safety review." Diana closed her eyes briefly. That decision would frustrate some, anger others, but it would save lives. "Good," she said again. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She rested her head back against the chair, eyes open, listening to the quiet hum of a base resetting itself. This wasn't redemption. It was reckoning. And for the first time in a long while, Diana felt something close to hope. Not loud. Not triumphant. Just steady. Sometimes that was enough. Why did the knock on the door feel heavier than the engines ever had? It came just after sunrise. Not sharp, not urgent, controlled, respectful, the kind of knock that carried authority without needing to announce it. Diana straightened slowly, joints stiff from a night spent in a chair that wasn't meant for rest. Her reflection in the darkened window looked older than it had the day before. Not weaker, just weathered. Colonel Brennan opened the door. General Anderson stepped inside. He didn't wear his rank like armor. No dramatic pause, no intimidation, just presence. The room adjusted around him the way gravity shifts water. He looked at Diana for a long moment, not evaluating, recognizing. "I read your file," he said, "all of it." Diana nodded. She didn't thank him. Gratitude wasn't required for truth. They sat. Anderson listened while Brennan briefed him. No interruptions, no expressions. When the recordings played, he closed his eyes, not in avoidance but concentration. When the last clip ended, the room felt stripped bare. "How long did you know?" he asked Diana. She met his gaze. "From the first week." "And you stayed?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question wasn't rhetorical, it was personal. Diana took a breath. "Because if I left, they would have learned nothing. If I spoke early, they would have corrected behavior, not culture." Anderson nodded slowly. "You understand the difference?" "Yes, sir." He leaned back. "Most people don't." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was processing. "Captain Stone?" Anderson asked. "Relieved," Brennan said, "pending formal action." "And the others?" "Under review." Anderson exhaled. "Good." He turned back to Diana. "You're aware this won't make you popular." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come back for popularity." He studied her carefully then. "You didn't come back for revenge either." "No, sir." "Then why come back at all?" That question reached further back than the last 3 months, further than the hangar, further than the mission she was supposed to die on. Diana answered honestly. "Because I believe standards only matter if someone is willing to uphold them when it's uncomfortable." Anderson nodded once, decisive, final. "You'll take the oversight position," he said, "effective immediately." It wasn't an offer. Diana felt a flicker of something in her chest, pride maybe, or acceptance, but beneath it sat something heavier, responsibility. "Yes, sir." As the general stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Major Harper." "Yes, sir." "You remind people who they're supposed to be," he said quietly. "That's a rare skill." When he was gone, the room felt strangely small. Brennan watched Diana closely. "You okay?" Diana considered the question. Again, "I will be." That phrase had become her truth. By mid-morning, word had spread. Not officially, it never did, but bases had a way of breathing information through walls. Eyes followed Diana now, not mocking, not dismissive, curious, careful. She hated that more than being ignored, because attention came with expectations. In the maintenance bay, a young airman hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am." Diana turned. "Yes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "For what?" "For laughing," he said, "yesterday." Diana studied him, not to judge, to understand. "What changed?" she asked. He swallowed. "I realized I've laughed at things because everyone else did. I didn't think about who it hurt." She nodded. "What will you do differently?" "I'll speak up," he said quickly, then corrected himself. "I'll try." "That's enough," she replied. "Not perfection, just effort." As the day went on, meetings replaced silence. Policies replaced habits. Oversight replaced assumption. Diana sat in rooms she used to be excluded from, listening more than she spoke. She took notes, asked questions, challenged language that hid harm behind efficiency. At one point, someone said, "That's just how it's always been." Diana looked up. "That's not a reason," she said. "That's an admission." The room shifted. Change didn't happen loudly. It crept, resisted, tested boundaries, but it moved. Late afternoon brought the meeting she'd been quietly dreading. Captain Stone stood in the doorway, no longer a captain in practice, even if the insignia remained on his uniform for now. He looked smaller, not humbled, just lost. He asked to speak privately. Brennan glanced at Diana. Diana nodded. Stone didn't sit. "I didn't know," he said, "who you were." Diana folded her arms loosely. "That's true. If I had—" She raised a hand, not aggressive, just final. "If you had known, you would have behaved differently. That's the problem." He frowned. "I was joking." "No," she said, "you were signaling." He didn't understand. "You were telling everyone watching that dignity was conditional," she continued. "That respect depended on rank, not humanity." Stone looked down. For the first time, there was no defense waiting. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "I believe you," Diana replied, and she did. "But harm doesn't require intent, just permission." Silence stretched between them. "What happens now?" he asked. "That's not my decision," Diana said. "But whatever it is, let it change you." He nodded once, left. Diana felt no victory. Only fatigue. That evening she returned to the flight line alone. The A-10 she'd started sat under maintenance lights, panels open, exposed, vulnerable. She rested a hand against its fuselage. She thought about all the times she'd trusted machines more than people. Machines failed predictably. People didn't. Her phone buzzed again. Messages, requests, invitations to panels, interviews. She ignored them. Instead, she sat on the concrete and watched the sun sink behind the hangars. She thought about the girl she'd been when she first put on a uniform. How eager, how certain, how unaware of how lonely integrity could be. She thought about the woman she was now, tired, steady, still standing. Tomorrow there would be pushback, quiet resistance, smiles that didn't reach eyes. Progress always angered someone who benefited from stagnation. She was ready, because this wasn't about proving strength. It was about sustaining it. And as the base lights flickered on, Diana realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Sometimes change doesn't roar. Sometimes it just refuses to be silent anymore. Why did the silence that followed feel more dangerous than open resistance? It crept in slowly, almost politely. No raised voices, no obvious defiance, just meetings that ended a little quicker, emails that went unanswered a little longer, smiles that stayed fixed while eyes stayed guarded. Diana noticed it immediately. She had learned in combat and out of it that the absence of noise often meant people were regrouping. Her new office overlooked the flight line, not a corner office, not symbolic, functional, glass walls, no place to hide. She asked for that. Transparency wasn't a slogan to her, it was a position. She spent her first week listening. Maintenance crews spoke in careful phrases at first, testing whether honesty was still safe. Pilots weighed every word like it might be logged. Supervisors oscillated between compliance and resentment, unsure which version of her they were supposed to deal with. The janitor, the major, the threat, the reminder. Diana didn't correct them, she let them adjust. Change was a process of discomfort. Rushing it only taught people how to pretend faster. Late one evening, she stayed behind reviewing incident logs when a soft knock came at the glass. Lieutenant Ramirez stood there, helmet tucked under one arm, posture tense. "Ma'am, do you have a minute?" Diana gestured him in. "Sit." He didn't at first. "I don't want this to sound like complaining." "Then don't complain," she said gently. "Tell me what's real." That disarmed him. He sat. "There's pressure," he said, "to go back to how things were, not openly, just suggestions, that we're being watched too closely, that morale is dropping." Diana nodded. She'd expected this. "Whose morale?" she asked. Ramirez hesitated. "The ones who were comfortable." "Comfort isn't morale," Diana said. "It's convenience." He exhaled. "I want to do this right. I just don't want to be isolated." Diana met his eyes. Isolation is a tactic, not a verdict. That was the truth she wished someone had told her years ago. After he left, she stared out at the flight line, thinking about the first time she'd felt that same fear. The quiet kind. The kind that told you staying silent would be easier. She hadn't listened then. She wouldn't now. The pushback sharpened when flight operations resumed. Every decision she questioned was treated as overreach, every pause as inefficiency. A few senior officers complied loudly while undermining quietly. One afternoon, a safety briefing went sideways. A senior pilot interrupted a junior airman mid-sentence, laughed, rolled his eyes. The room tensed, not because of the disrespect, but because Diana was present. They were watching to see what she'd do. She let the moment breathe. Then she spoke. "Let him finish." The pilot smirked. "We're on a schedule." Diana didn't raise her voice. "Then manage your time better." The room froze. The airman finished. His hands shook, his voice didn't. Afterward, he found Diana in the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. "You earned the space." That night, the anonymous complaints began. Too strict. Too sensitive. Disruptive. Diana read everyone, not defensively, diagnostically. Patterns mattered more than tone. And the pattern was clear. Accountability felt like punishment to those who'd never been held to it. Colonel Brennan checked in regularly. "You're making waves," she said once. Diana smiled faintly. "Water that doesn't move stagnates." Brennan laughed, then sobered. "They're testing you." "I know." "Are you tired?" Diana considered the question. "Yes," she said, "but not uncertain." That was the difference. One evening, as rain streaked the windows, Diana stayed late again. The base was quieter than usual, lights dimmed, energy subdued. Her phone rang. Unknown number, secure line. She answered. "Major Harper," a voice said, older, measured. "This is Master Sergeant Collins." She recognized the name immediately. A legend, retired, decorated, respected. "Yes, Sergeant," Diana replied. "I heard about what you're doing," he said, "and I wanted to tell you it's overdue." She closed her eyes briefly. "When I was coming up," he continued, "we lost good people because no one wanted to be the problem. We called it resilience. It was neglect." His voice thickened slightly. "I wish someone like you had been there." Diana swallowed. "Thank you, Sergeant." After the call, she sat in the quiet and let the weight of it settle, not as pressure, as purpose. The next morning, she made a decision. She called a base-wide forum. No speeches, no podium, just chairs in a circle. Attendance wasn't mandatory. That was important. At first only a handful showed. Then more, some stood in the back, arms crossed, listening. Diana spoke briefly. "This isn't about blame," she said. "It's about alignment. If you think something is unsafe, say it. If you think someone is being dismissed, interrupt that. If you're afraid to speak, ask yourself why." A hand went up, a civilian contractor, nervous. "I've never been asked this before," she said. "What happens if I speak and nothing changes?" Diana didn't sugarcoat it. "Then we failed, and we try again." That honesty landed harder than reassurance ever could. Stories followed, small ones, then bigger, moments people had swallowed, warnings they'd kept to themselves, laughter they'd pretended not to hear. Diana didn't comment on each, she listened. When the forum ended, no one applauded. They lingered. That was progress. Later, alone, Diana felt the exhaustion finally catch up to her. The kind that seeped into the bones and whispered that rest was a luxury. She sat at her desk and opened an old flight log she kept digitally. Entries from years ago, missions flown, lives covered, decisions made under pressure. She found the entry from the night she'd been shot down, the last one before the silence. She read it slowly. Not with pain, with clarity. She hadn't survived to be comfortable. She survived to correct course. Outside, the rain stopped. The flight line lights reflected off wet concrete, steady and unyielding. Diana closed the log. Tomorrow would bring resistance again, maybe sharper, maybe quieter. But she wasn't alone anymore. And sometimes that was all resilience needed. Not applause. Not permission. Just someone willing to stay. Why did the final decision feel heavier than any mission briefing she'd ever sat through? The room was full, but Diana felt alone in a way she hadn't since the desert nights years ago, when the stars felt close and the ground felt uncertain. The base auditorium hummed with low conversation. Officers, enlisted, civilians, faces she now recognized not by rank but by the way they listened. This wasn't a tribunal. It wasn't a ceremony. It was a reckoning. The investigation had reached its end, findings compiled, recommendations finalized, careers altered, not erased, not destroyed, but reshaped by consequence. That distinction mattered to Diana more than most people understood. She stood near the side wall, hands clasped behind her back, posture relaxed but grounded. She wasn't meant to speak today. That had been the plan. Let policy talk. Let documentation carry the weight. But plans, she knew, often changed. General Anderson took the stage. No dramatic introduction. No applause requested. He spoke plainly about safety, about responsibility, about how power, when left unexamined, quietly corrodes what it's meant to protect. Diana watched the room instead of him. She saw Stone, seated 2 rows back, eyes forward, face unreadable. She saw Captain Grant, shoulders slumped, finally understanding that silence could be as loud as misconduct. She saw junior airmen leaning forward slightly, hungry for something they hadn't realized they were missing until now. When Anderson finished, he paused. "There's one more thing," he said. Diana felt it then, that subtle shift, like turbulence you sensed before the aircraft instruments ever showed it. He turned toward her. "Major Harper." Every head followed. She didn't flinch. "You were not obligated to do what you did," Anderson continued. "You could have reported, left, moved on. Instead, you stayed. You observed. You endured. And because of that, lives will be safer." A ripple moved through the room. Diana stepped forward slowly. Each step felt deliberate, not rehearsed, not heroic, just honest. She didn't stand behind the podium. She stood beside it. I'm not here to be recognized, she said, voice steady, low enough that people leaned in. I'm here because culture doesn't change when it's embarrassed. It changes when it's understood. She paused, let that settle. I was ignored on purpose, she continued. Mocked casually, dismissed reflexively. And I want you to understand something, none of that was unique. It wasn't personal, it was practiced. Some faces shifted, others hardened. That's why it worked, she said, because no one thought it mattered. She looked directly at the junior enlisted rows now. If you learned anything from this, let it be this. Dignity doesn't come from what you wear or what you fly or who salutes you. It comes from how you treat the person you think has no power. Silence followed, deep, uncomfortable. She didn't rush to fill it. I don't want apologies, she said quietly. I want habits changed. I want the quiet moments to look different from now on. She stepped back. That was it. No applause came. None was needed. After the gathering, people drifted slowly, like they didn't quite want to leave the gravity of the moment behind. Diana stayed near the wall, answering a few quiet questions, nodding, listening. Stone approached last. He stopped a few feet away, hesitated. I'm transferring out, he said finally, voluntarily. Diana studied him, not to judge, to measure sincerity. I believe you, she said. He exhaled. I didn't realize how loud I was being. She nodded. Most people don't. They stood there a moment longer, two paths crossing briefly before diverging permanently. That evening, Diana returned to the hangar alone. The A-10 was gone, scheduled maintenance elsewhere. The space felt bigger without it, emptier, honest. She walked the length of the concrete floor slowly, footsteps echoing softly. This was where it had started, with laughter, with cameras, with certainty that power would protect cruelty. She stopped where she'd set the mop down that day. She remembered how small she'd felt, not because of fear, but because she'd known what was coming, known she'd have to carry it through without reassurance. She bent down and touched the concrete. Cold, solid, real. Colonel Brennan joined her quietly. You're leaving, Brennan said, not a question. Yes. Flying. Diana smiled faintly. Eventually, oversight first, make sure this sticks. Brennan nodded. You changed this place. Diana shook her head. I interrupted it, that's different. They stood in silence for a while. You ever regret it? Brennan asked. Diana considered the question carefully. No, she said, but I do miss being invisible sometimes. Brennan chuckled softly. Invisibility has its uses. Yes, Diana agreed, so does being seen. Later that night, Diana packed her office. She moved efficiently, no nostalgia, no hesitation. She left the glass walls exactly as they were, transparent, unforgiving. As she walked out, a young airman called after her. Ma'am. She turned. I just wanted to say, I didn't know I was allowed to expect better. Diana smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just real. You always were, she said. Outside, the night air was cool, calm. The base settled into its familiar rhythm, lights humming, distant engines, quiet footsteps. Diana paused before getting into her car. She looked back one last time. This place would move on, it always did. New people, new challenges, new opportunities to forget. But forgetting would be harder now. Because somewhere in its memory lived a moment when dignity had been tested and had responded not with volume, but with precision. She drove away without ceremony. No escort, no spotlight, just the steady hum of motion. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits, observes, endures, and when the moment finally comes, it doesn't shout. It acts, because dignity doesn't need permission. It only needs the courage to stay.